Yep.
Hey guys, Chad Hoover, Kayak Bassing TV. So the bass are up the creeks. Like it's fall, right? We're fall and we're rolling into winter. So the bass are up the creeks. They're chasing shad. In a lot of cases, cold fronts are coming in and they're causing those shad to die off. What do you throw? So the water temperatures have cooled off. The bass are up the creeks chasing shad, okay? This bite has slowed down and this bite has slowed down. And you want to fish a little slower, all right? So here's what you're going to throw now, all right? What I start with is a little bit slower presentation, similar to a fluke, and it's the Yamamoto Seiko. I like to fish it on this grip pin hook from Mustad and rig it by just going through the nose, going in just far enough to make that grip pin go in there, rotate it around, pop it in, get that plastic just out over the transition of the hook, and then use that grip pin to hold it in place. And then I'm going to take that, measure it, go through the body, come out the top, and I'm going to have that hook laying in there in that hook channel, nice and clean. Skin it if I need to, if there's any grass, leave it exposed if I can get away with it. And I'm going to use the weight of that hook and the serrations of this tail to give it the action. I'm simply going to throw it out a lot like I would a fluke. But what I'm going to do with this bait is I'm going to give it snatches and pops and let it fall. I'm going to put a little more action on this bait than I would a fluke, and then I'm going to let it do its job. But I'm going to show you exactly what happens, how to fish it, how to work your rod, and the type of presentation that you should use, and then a couple of variations. So with this bait, like I said, it's a lot like a fluke. The difference is it's buoyant. The difference is in this case, I'm using a little bit heavier hook. It's got the grip pin set up on it and it's a little heavier gauge, right? And so I'm gonna make really short casts. You're inside of a creek, so you wanna make sidearm casts. As soon as the lure hits the water, let off a rod's length worth of line, engage your reel. And then a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm holding position in current or one hand paddling, and I'm just taking up my slack with the back of my finger. Every now and then I'm giving that lure a snatch and a give. So I'm snatching it and giving the line back, and then I'm reeling up the slack with my hand, or like I said, I'm holding my paddle, holding position, and I'm finger rolling, okay? I'm just finger rolling that bait towards me, but I'm giving line back and modulating that action. Snatching it up to the surface, it's relatively buoyant. I want it to nose over and just look like a dying bait. That is deadly effective, and that bait right there is killer. The reason I rig it where the weight, the hook point is just barely covered, is if I need to add a weight to that to give it more action, to cover more of the water column. If you'll remember in one of my other videos, one of the things that I talk about with the shad migration up creeks is they're not going to work the banks, right? They're going to be more in the center of the creek. And so you may have creeks that are 6 to 10 to 10 plus foot deep. And so you may want to add a bullet weight to this presentation to get it down there. And having that bullet weight either click against the head of that hook shank or add a bead in from Woo Tungsten is going to give it that click that sounds like bait fish getting crunched, sounds like bait fish turning directions real fast, and that clicking is what can activate a bass bite. So that's the reason that I like to rig it that way. That's the reason I like to use that grip pin hook, and that Seiko bait from Yamamoto is deadly. It's got a lot of action, a lot of tail action without barely moving it because of the way it's segmented. You see how limp that is? So it's just got a lot of crazy action there. If you can just see from my nervousness from drinking coffee, it's putting a lot of action in it. Same thing with barely any movement in the water column. That thing looks like a dying bait doing the dying fish quiver, and they absolutely demolish it. Now, that is for my off-peak periods and my lower activity periods. When those fish are charged up, I'm gonna use a couple of things as that water temperature starts to drop below that 55-degree mark and those fish start to get a lot more active. But the shad are starting to move into that phase where those cold fronts are gonna kill some of them off. That's gonna be a lipless crank that's a little heavier, like this rattle trap from Bill Lewis in a chrome with a little bit of color and a little bit of blue to make it stick out in the school. Or you can go with crazy contrast like this chartreuse, sexy citrus with the black back with the stripe down the side, red eye shad from Strike King. And then a lot of times you just want to break up and look a little different. So these little compact red eye shad are super heavy. They got a lot of wobble, they got a lot of rattle, and those fish can key in on that fish being a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to digest, and a lot of times they'll eat that when they won't eat a bigger lure. So when that fish is super active, super aggressive, and they're busting shad, I'm gonna have one of those tied on. In fact, I'm gonna have one of all three of these tied on as I'm working my way up the creeks. And then there's something that not a lot of people think about throwing, and it's not something that I've talked about a lot, but I have a lot of success on it. And that's just a twitching mullet. It's a twitching mullet 8 from Rapala. I tie this thing with the split ring instead of a loop knot, and the reason for that is I want that split ring to create a bit of a click. I want those split rings in the hook shaft slapping against the body to create a bit of a click. That click is going to simulate that bait fish school. It's going to simulate that feeding sound, and it's going to really charge those fish up. Now, what's different about this bait is I like to rig it with J hooks, okay? These are little J hooks that come with this twitching mullet, and this fish falls in a wobbling fashion. It's flat-sided, so when you jerk it, it's gonna climb in the water column, it's gonna roll, it's gonna rotate, and I like to fish this on heavier fluorocarbon, something in that 17 to 25 pound, generally in Vizex from Seagar, because I want it to fall flatter, okay? I want that fluorocarbon to act as some resistance going through the water column, but I want that fluorocarbon to help sink it because it's heavier, all right? And I want that bait to not nose over. I want it to fall like a dying shad. I want it to kind of rock and window pane through the water column. But the reason that I go to something like this is it falls through the water column and it stays suspended longer. But if I do let it fall all the way to the bottom, unlike a lipless crank with treble hooks, these J hooks are less likely to snag. Not only are they less likely to snag, but when you do hook into something and you pull on it, you can get it to roll. With a treble hook, you're gonna roll it, but the other hook is gonna catch into it, and you can generally pull this free. You can play with turning them in opposite directions to get them to come over wood. You can play with turning them opposite directions to get them to come through grass. I start off with them set up facing in opposite directions. So as I'm bringing it through the water column, this one is, you know, in the perfect position to hook that fish, and this one's in the perfect position to hook that fish. But if you start to hang up too much, you can flip this one around to where they're both facing forward. You'll get a lot less hang ups. You'll catch a lot more fish. So guys, as that water temperature starts to drop and those fish are committed to the backs of those creeks and those shad are starting to die off, that's 3 lures that you can count on throwing. One last thing I want to throw in there is for that Zaco. If you want to fish that bait only and you want to cover a lot of the water column, you can switch between the standard grip pin and that weighted kill grip pin and get that bait to fall through the water column. You get a similar wobble to that twitching mullet. You just don't get the rattle, you don't get the click, and you don't get that extra amount of attractiveness. So if you got clear water, you got fish that are feeding or aggressive, you can get away with that. But if you got a little bit more stain, you got a little bit more lethargic fish, put something in there that's going to activate those fish and get them to feed, and go with that twitching mullet from Rapala. So that's my take on fishing that fall, starting to transition into winter, when those fish are back in the creeks and the shad are starting to die off. This is one of my favorite times of fish. It's deadly effective. A lot of guys have given up fishing and they're committed to the deer stands, they're committed to watching football on the couch. The boat ramps are empty and you got the fish to yourself. Anyway, we'll see you guys next time on Kayak Bassing TV. Don't forget to smash that thumbs up button. Leave a comment below, comment on the comments. You guys interact here as part of the KBF Nation, as part of the Brotherhood. Don't forget to subscribe and don't forget to turn on that notifications so that you know each and every time I release a new video. And stay tuned for some awesome giveaways, updates, and some more action-packed videos real soon. Watch one of these other videos and I'll see you next time. The end. That's it. It's over. No more knowledge today. Cut off. You're done. That's a wrap. I need one of them thingamajig, you know what I mean? Click. Like a, what are these things called? You know what I'm talking about? Like the movie clicker thing. I need one of them. Like, actually, not only do we need the clipper thing, we need like the clipper person. Like the, you know what I'm saying? Christy! Christy! Oh, never mind, I was actually joking. I didn't realize you were actually out here.